4. Learning humility. To cultivate the quality of humility is one step towards enlightenment. By being humble, we gain much and lose nothing. Prayer and contemplation strengthen our willpower in cultivating this inner quality. Ego and vanity are in vain. Once, my master lived in a holy place of the Himalayas called Tungnath. On the way to see him, I stopped at a mountain shrine called Karnaprayag. A great renowned Swami called Prahat Swami lived in a cave near the shrine, so I went to visit him. I was being trained to be a Swami at that time. I greeted him according to our tradition. He was seated on a blanket which had been folded into quarters, and a few villagers were seated before him. I expected him to offer me a seat beside him. I was still suffering from an inflated ego, at least partly because people in the villages of India respect and bow before a Swami. This feeds the ego and creates many problems for a Swami in training. Prabhat Swami knew my problem. He smiled and said, "Please take your seat." I asked, "Could you please unfold your blanket so I can sit next to you?" I insisted, but he just laughed at me. I asked, "Why won't you let me sit next to you?" I was quite conceited and impolite. He quoted the dialogue between Rama and Hanuman in the Yoga Vashishta and said, "Eternally we are one and the same, but as human beings, you are still a servant and I am your master." Modern man tries to have the position of a master without attaining anything. Then he gave me a lesson, saying, "A man went to see a master who was seated on a high platform, teaching many people. The man held a distinguished position in society, so he chafed at being treated like all the rest of the students, without getting special attention. He went up to the master and asked, 'Sir, can I sit on the same platform with you?' The master said, 'You should know the role of a student as well as the role of a master.' The man asked, 'Sir, what are the duties of a student?' The master explained, 'A student cleans, serves, washes dishes, cooks food, prepares and purifies himself, and serves his master.' Then the man asked, 'And what does a master do, sir?' 'A master teaches. He doesn't do any of the menial work.' 'Why can't I become a master without doing all of this?' asked the man. 'The menial work has nothing to do with my learning how to teach.' The master said, 'No, you will be hurting yourself and hurting others. You have to understand from the very beginning that the spiritual path can tolerate everything but ego. Ego places a veil between the aspirant and the process of learning. When one becomes egocentric, he isolates himself and thus is not able to communicate with his teacher and conscience, and doesn't follow the instructions of the teacher. Such an ego needs immense austerities and modifications, without which all knowledge drains away. My swollen ego. During the rainy season, Swamis do not travel, but stay in one place for 4 months. People then come and learn the scriptures from them. Although I was still being trained as a Swami, I too would teach every day. Students often create problems for a teacher. For instance, the first thing they do is place him high above them so that there is limited communication. My students built a high platform on which I was asked to sit. I was inordinately proud that I had a large following. That happens when you are a neophyte and hanker after name and fame. The more one's followers increase, the more egotistical one becomes. I remained under the notion that one particular Swami among my students was not very knowledgeable. During my lectures, he used to sit quietly in a corner. This Swami was actually an advanced adept, although I was not at all aware of it. He came because I used to pray to the Lord. Lord, enlighten me. Help me, Lord. I sincerely cried and prayed, so the Lord sent that man to me. And what did I do? I used to give him my loincloth for washing, and I would order him to do things for me all day. He was with me for 2 months before deciding to teach me a lesson. One morning we were both sitting on a rock on a bank of the Ganges. While brushing my teeth, I ordered, "Go and fetch me some water." He had had enough of my swollen ego. He said, "Go on brushing." I lost awareness of what was happening to me after that. 2 days later, some people found me lying there. My face was horribly swollen. I had dropped the brush, but was still rubbing my finger in my mouth continuously. I was doing it unconsciously. My master appeared and said, "Get up." I opened my eyes, but could not lift my face. It was so heavy. My gums were swollen, and I could not move my jaw. Then my master told me, "That Swami is a great sage. God sent him to you. You do not know to be humble and behave properly with the men of God. Now I hope you have learned a lesson. Do not commit this mistake again." Then he said, "Get up, look at the sky, and start walking." I protested, "If I keep on looking at the sky and continue walking, I will stumble and fall down." He said, "Bow your head, and then you will be able to walk without stumbling. For going through this hazardous journey of life, you should learn to be humble. Ego and pride are 2 stumbling blocks on this journey. If you are not humble, you cannot learn. Your growth will be stunted." When one begins to tread the path of spirituality, it is essential to be humble. Ego creates barriers, and the faculty of discrimination is lost. If discrimination is not sharpened, reason does not function properly, and there is no clarity of mind. A clouded mind is not a good instrument on the path of enlightenment. There must be renunciation. There must be action. In reconciliation of the two, the crown of life resides. It is not action that ought to be renounced, but the fruit of action. Be sure that the ego has been annihilated in the ocean of consciousness. Be sure that it is not lurking somewhere in the inner dark chamber of your heart. Its ways are various, and its forms are numerous. Action greased with love gives a glimpse of eternity and perpetual joy. Cultivating inner qualities. When I was in Srinagar, Kashmir, I met a great scholar of Vedanta who was head of the department of philosophy in a renowned university. He said, "If I can answer your questions, I will be glad to do so." So I put these questions to him. The Upanishads appear to be full of contradictions. In one place they say that Brahman is one without second. Somewhere else they say that everything is Brahman. In a third place they say this world is false, and Brahman alone is truth. And in a fourth place it is said that there is only one absolute reality beneath all these diversities. How can one make sense of all these conflicting statements? He replied, I don't know how to answer a Swami's questions. You are learning to be a Swami of the Shankaracharya order. You should know the answers better than I. I met many other learned people, but nobody could satisfy me. They could give me commentaries on different Upanishads, but no one could resolve these apparent contradictions. Eventually I went to a Swami near Uttarkashi, 135 miles deep in the Himalayas. His name was Vishnu Maharaj. He was always naked, having no clothes or any other possessions. I said to him, I want to know something about the Upanishads. He said, bow down first. You are asking about the Upanishads with a swollen ego. How can you possibly learn these subtle truths? I did not like to bow down before anyone, so I left this place. After that, whenever I inquired about the Upanishads, I was told, go to Vishnu Maharaj. No one else can answer you. But I was afraid because he knew that my whole problem was my ego, and he immediately tested my ego by saying, bow down, and then I will answer your question. I wouldn't do that. I tried my best to find other Swamis who could answer these questions, but everyone referred me to Vishnu Maharaj. Every day I would approach the cave where he lived on a bank of the Ganges. I would think, let me see how he answers my questions. But when I got near, I would become very fearful of the impending confrontation, so I would change my mind and go back. One day he saw me nearby and said, come, sit down. Are you hungry? Do you want to eat with me? He was very pleasant and gracious. He gave me food and drink, and then said, now you should go. I have no more time to spend with you today. I said, I have come with certain questions, sir. Food and drink I can get elsewhere. I want spiritual food. He said, you are not prepared. In your mind you want to examine me. You want to know whether I can reply to your questions or not. You don't want to learn. When you are prepared, come to me and I will answer you. The next day I became very humble and I said, sir, the whole night I prepared myself, and now I'm ready. Then he taught me, and all my questions were resolved. Answering my questions systematically, he said that there are no contradictions in the teachings of the Upanishads. These teachings are received directly by the great sages in a deep state of contemplation and meditation. He then explained, when the student starts practicing, he realizes that this apparent world is changeable, while truth never changes. Then he knows that the world of forms and names, which is full of changes, is false, and that behind it there exists an absolute reality that is unchanging. In the second step, when he has known the truth, he understands that there is only one truth, and that truth is omnipresent. So there is really nothing like falsehood. In that stage, he knows that reality, which is one and the same in both the finite and infinite worlds. But there is another higher state in which the aspirant realizes that there is only one absolute reality without second, and that which is apparently false is in reality a manifestation of the absolute one. These apparent contradictions confuse only that student who has not studied the Upanishads from a competent teacher. A competent teacher makes the student aware of the experiences one has on various levels. These are the levels of consciousness, and there is no contradiction in them. He continued, "The teachings of the Upanishads are not understood by the ordinary mind or even by the intellectual mind. Intuitive knowledge alone leads to understanding them. In fact, I wanted to strengthen my knowledge which I had received from my master, and knowingly used to pose such questions to others. Such questions posed without being humble are never answered by the sages. The questions are resolved by humility itself. This great man taught me to rise above argumentation, and instructed me to allow intuition to flow uninterruptedly to solve such subtle questions. I thought I was perfect. As a young man, I thought I had perfected myself, and that I didn't need any further teaching or study. I felt there was no Swami in India as advanced as I, because I seemed to be more intellectually knowledgeable than others, and I was myself teaching many Swamis. When I conveyed to my master this inflated opinion of myself, he looked at me and asked, "Are you drugged?" "What do you mean?" I said. "No, really, this is the way I feel." He returned to the subject a few days later. "You are still a child. You only know how to attend college. You have not mastered 4 things. Master them, and then you will have attained something. Have a desire to meet and know God, but have no selfish desire to acquire things for yourself. Give up all anger, greed, and attachment. Practice meditation regularly. Only when you have done these 4 things will you become perfect." Then he told me to visit certain sages. He said, "When you are with them, you should be very humble. If you become obstinate or aggressive, you will be deprived of their knowledge. They will just close their eyes and sit in meditation." He said this because he knew that I was very obstinate and impatient. He gave me a list of sages of different orders. They were his friends who had known me from my young age, because I had been with my master when he visited with them. I had been quite mischievous. I used to pester them and throw things, so that they would know I was around. Whenever they came to visit my master, they would ask, "Is he still with you?" First I went to see a Swami who was renowned for silence. He had withdrawn from worldly concerns. No matter what happened around him, he never looked up. On my way I talked with villagers nearby. They told me, "He doesn't talk to anyone or look at anyone. He doesn't even eat. This is the 3rd month he has been in the same place without getting up. We have never seen such a man." This state is called ajagarvritti, which means python's tendency. Just as a python remains in a dormant state for a long time, some sages do not move for many days, but remain in a deep state of meditation. When I went to see him, he was lying on a hillock under a banyan tree, smiling with his eyes closed, as though he were a lord of the universe. He never wore anything, whether it was summer, winter, or the rainy season. His skin appeared weatherproof, like that of an elephant. He did not own a thing, but was utterly content. When I first saw him lying that way, I thought, at least he should have a little decency. Then I thought, my master told me to visit him, and I know that my master would not waste my time. I am only seeing his body. I touched his feet. According to our custom, when we touch the feet of great men, they bless us. He was not sensitive to external stimuli. He was somewhere else. 3 or 4 times I said, "Hello, sir. How are you?" But he did not respond. There was no movement, no answer. Then I started massaging his feet. When our teachers are tired, we often do that. I thought he would be pleased, but he kicked me. That kick was so strong that I was thrown backwards all the way down the hill, which was quite steep, and into a lake below. I fell against many trees and rocks on my way down, and ended up with many painful bruises. I was vindictive. What reason has he to do this? I came to him in reverence, started massaging his feet, and he kicked me? He's not a sage. I'll teach him. I'll break both his legs. I'll give him double what he gave me. I really wanted to retaliate. I decided that perhaps my master sent me to teach him a lesson. When I returned to the hill to vent my anger, he was sitting up and smiling. He said, "How are you, son?" I said, "How am I? After kicking me and knocking me down the hill, you're asking, how am I?" He said, "Your master told you to master 4 things, and you have even destroyed 1. I kicked you to test your control of anger. Now you are so angry that you cannot learn anything here. You are not tranquil. You are still very immature. You don't follow the spiritual teaching of your master, who is so selfless. What could you possibly learn from me? You are not prepared for my teachings. Go away." Nobody had ever talked to me like that. When I thought about what he said, I realized it was true. I was completely possessed by my anger. He asked, "Do you know why we touch the feet of a sage?" Then he recited something beautiful, a Persian belief. A sage gives the best part of his life, surrendering it at the lotus feet of the Lord. People ordinarily recognize you only by your face, but the face of the sage is not here. It is with his Lord. People find only feet here, so they bow to the feet. He said, "You should have that humility when touching someone's feet. Now you cannot stay here. You will have to go." I wept and thought, a few days ago I thought I was perfect, but surely I am not. Then I said, "Sir, I will come back to you when I have really conquered my ego." And I departed. All the kicks and blows of life teach us something. No matter whence they come, they are blessings in disguise, if we but learn their lesson. Buddha said, "For a wise man, there is nothing to be called bad." Any adversity of life provides a step for his growth, provided he knows how to utilize it. I visited another Swami and determined that no matter what he did, I would not get angry. He had a beautiful farm. He said, "I'll give you this farm. Would you like it?" I said, "Of course." He smiled. "Your master told you not to be attached, and yet you are very quick to tie yourself to a farm." I felt very small. My mind seemed bent toward anger and attachment, and not toward higher things. Later, I was sent to still another Swami. He knew that I was coming. There was a small natural fountain on the way to where we used to go and wash. He left some gold coins there. I stopped there, and I found 3 of them. For a second I entertained the thought of picking them up. I did so, and tucked them inside my loincloth. Then I reconsidered. But these coins are not mine. Why do I need them? This is not good. I put them back. Then I went to the Swami. He was annoyed. I bowed before him, and he said, "Why did you pick up the coins? Do you still have lust for gold? Get out. This is not the place for you." I protested, "But I left them there." He said, "You left them later on. The problem is that you were attracted to them and picked them up in the first place." From the experiences that these sages gave me, I began to realize the difference between book knowledge and experiential knowledge. I began to see my many weaknesses, and I did not find it pleasant. Finally I returned to my master. He asked, "What have you learned?" "I have learned that I have intellectual knowledge, but I do not behave in accord with that knowledge." He said, "This is the problem all intellectuals have. They become overly proud of their knowledge. Now I will teach you how to practice, so that you will know." A human being knows enough, but that knowledge needs to be brought into daily life. If this is not done, the knowledge remains limited within the boundaries of knowing only. We all know what to do and what not to do, but it is very difficult to learn how to be. Real knowledge is found not in knowing, but rather in being. Practice makes perfect. Once when I was teaching about life and death, a Swami quietly came in and sat with my students. I thought that he was a beginner, so I treated him as I treated the others. I was annoyed because he only smiled, constantly smiled, while the others were very conscientiously taking notes. I finally asked, "Are you listening to me?" He said, "You are only talking, but I can demonstrate mastery over life and death. Bring me an ant." A large ant was brought. He cut it into 3 pieces and separated them. Then he closed his eyes and sat motionless. After a moment the 3 parts moved toward each other. They joined together, and the revived ant scurried away. I knew it was not hypnosis or anything like that. I felt very small before that Swami, and I was embarrassed before my students because I only knew the scriptures without a first-hand understanding and mastery of life and death. I asked, "Where did you learn that?" He said, "Your master taught me." At that I became angry with my master, and immediately went to him. Seeing me, he asked, "What happened? Why are you once again allowing anger to control you? You are still a slave to your violent emotions." I said, "You teach others things which you don't teach me. Why?" He looked at me and said, I have taught you many things, but you don't practice. That is not my fault. All these achievements depend on practice, not just on verbal knowledge of them. If you know all about the piano but don't practice, you will never create music. Knowing is useless without practice. Knowing is mere information. Practice gives direct experience, which alone is valid knowledge. The Sage from the Valley of Flowers. There was not much literature on the flowers and ecology of the Himalayas, but whatever was available, I tried my best to go through. One of the British writers wrote a book about the valleys of flowers of the Himalayas. After reading this book, a flame of burning desire arose in my heart. In the Himalayas there are countless varieties of lilies, rhododendrons, and other flowers, but I specifically was anxious to see one of the two valleys. There lived a sage, constantly traveling in that region of the Himalayas, where this valley of flowers exists. I knew him well. He was very strong and healthy, about 80 years of age, but quite unusual. He used to carry a unique blanket all the time. It was very heavy. The weight of this blanket was approximately 80 to 100 pounds. You might wonder how he made this blanket so heavy. Any piece of cloth which he found during his wide travels, he would patch onto the blanket. It was a blanket of 1,000 patches. He called it Gudari, which means blanket of patches, and people called him Gudari Baba. On my request, he said, "If you would really like to see the Valley of Flowers and want to follow me, you will have to carry this blanket." I agreed, but when I put the blanket on my shoulders, I stumbled under its weight. He asked, "How is it possible for a young man like you to be so weak when you are apparently so healthy?" He picked up the blanket and said, "See how light it is?" Then he put it on my shoulder again. He knew my master, and so he allowed me to follow him to the Valley of Flowers. As I was following him, this sage said, "No one can retain his memory when he goes through the Valley of Flowers during the blooming season. We should bring all the obstinate kids like you here and set them right. Those who try to be intellectual and argue with us should be brought here so that they understand their worth." I said, "But I am following you." He said, "Oh yes, you argue all the time and don't listen attentively. You are very proud of your intellectual knowledge. I do not know how to read and write. You are more educated than I. You have education, but I have control of mind." I told him I also have control. He replied, "We shall see." I said, "Sir, first of all, please take away your blanket from my shoulders, because it is difficult to carry." He lamented, "Oh, the children of this modern age." He took his blanket from me and started conversing with it. "Oh, my beloved blanket, nobody understands anything about you. No one knows that you are a living blanket." I looked at him and thought, this man is really crazy. The next morning, a Japanese monk joined us. He was equally anxious to see the Valley of Flowers. This Japanese monk also thought that Gaudari Baba was a crazy man. He asked me, "Rama, can you explain why this man is carrying such a heavy load? We started talking, and I thought it would be nice to share these experiences with each other. The monk was afraid of going to the Valley of Flowers all alone. Someone had told him that if any traveler goes to see this valley, he forgets everything, and his senses do not coordinate in perceiving sense objects. The traveler loses his memory and smiles all the time. He said that this Baba was the right person to guide us, because he traveled in this region and knew all the trails. The next day this Japanese monk started shivering with fever. He had lived in the jungles of Burma and had suffered from malaria. He had a temperature of 103 to 104 degrees, and his pulse was very high. The Baba said to him, "You told this boy that I was crazy. Do you want to see the living power of my blanket? Do you know that this blanket is not a mere blanket, but a living force? Do you want to get well? Then kneel down and be humble." The Baba covered the Japanese monk with the blanket. The monk said, "I will be flattened. It's too heavy, and I'm a small man." The Baba said, "Keep quiet." After a few minutes he took the blanket away from the monk. When he removed the blanket, it was shivering. The Baba asked the monk, "What happened to your fever?" He said, "Sir, I don't have the fever anymore." The Baba said, "This blanket is very generous and kind, and has taken away your fever." The Baba looked at me and said, "Do you want this fever to be cured forever?" I said, "Yes, please." The Baba said, "But he calls me crazy. I don't think he deserves my help." I said, "The sages are kind and great, and they always forgive others." The Baba smiled and said, "Of course I will help him." We traveled together for 15 days, and the Japanese monk did not suffer from fever again. 9 miles outside Badranath, there is a side trail which leads to the Valley of Flowers, where there is a small Gurudwara, that is, temple of Sikhs. We took our meal there. The people of this temple knew Gadari Baba very well. We rested the whole day in the temple and started our journey to the Valley of Flowers, toward Hemkund the next day. The flowers were in full bloom as far as the eye could see. For the first few hours it was soothing to the senses and stimulating to the mind, but slowly I started noticing that my memory was slipping away. After 5 or 6 hours, the Baba asked, "Hey, you! Can you tell me your name?" We were both so disoriented that we could not remember our names. We had completely forgotten them. I was only aware of my existence and had a hazy idea that I was with 2 other people. That's all. The fragrance of those flowers was so strong that we could not think rationally. Our ability to reason wouldn't function. Our senses were anesthetized. We had a faint idea of our existence and that of the things around us. Our talk to each other did not make any sense. We lived in this valley for a week. It was highly enjoyable. The Baba made fun of us all the time and said, "Your education and strength have no value." After we came out of the Valley of Flowers, the Baba said, "Your joy was because of the influence of the fragrance of the flowers. You were not meditating. That's what marijuana and hashish do to people, and they think that they are in meditation. Look at me. I was not affected or influenced by the fragrance of the wild flowers. Ha! 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 You have gone to college and read many books. You have lived on the opinions of others so far." Today you had a good chance to understand and compare direct knowledge and the so-called knowledge which is really imitation. So far the opinions that you have are actually the opinions of others. Those who live on the opinions of others do not ever have the ability to decide and express their own opinions. Boys, this informative knowledge is not considered by us to be real knowledge. Even if you understand that direct knowledge alone is valid, you don't have control over the mind. The education given to modern children is very superficial. Without any discipline, control over the mind is not possible, and without control of the mind, direct experience is impossible. The Japanese monk left for Bodh Gaya, and I lived with the Baba for another 15 days. He is a free wanderer of this region, and all the pilgrims have heard about him. For practical schooling, it is important for the renunciate to live with such sages who have a direct knowledge of the values of life, with its currents and cross-currents.